So thank you so much.
Yeah.
First of all, to the Indic Research Forum and Yashas for inviting me to present today. I really appreciate this opportunity. As said, I will talk about the Taliban's relationship with various terror groups and do this in 4 stages. First, let's have a look. Where are they in Afghanistan, the terror groups? Then I will specifically look at the Taliban Al-Qaeda relationship, the Taliban and the Islamic State relationship, and what this affiliate in the Islamic State of the Islamic State in Afghanistan actually means for the greater global network of the Islamic State, and then development threat scenarios that we've been discussing in Europe and with our American friends. By the way, good morning. I'm in New York right now. What is the state of play in Afghanistan? So first of all, you don't need to worry about Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for terrorism. It already is. So if you just look at where the Al-Qaeda groups are, and I've very generously made the circles smaller. I could have just circled it around the country, just to give you a bit of an indication. In the north, of course, you have the IMU that was already talked about, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, ETIM, also called the Turkestan Islamic Party. These are the Uyghurs that the Chinese are worried about, and of course the Islamic Jihad group, IJG, that is an offspin of the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan and responsible for attack planning outside of the region, including in Europe, including in Germany. In the eastern parts of Afghanistan, of course, you have those groups that have been pushed over by the Pakistani military operation the last couple of years, so Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and others, and of course the TTP. And in the south, you have EQIS, the Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, and of course you have Al-Qaeda core all over the country with the Taliban leadership. Then, of course, you also have the Haqqani network, which I separated out from the Taliban, not only because they're ideologically far more inclined towards Salafist ideas than any other part of the Taliban, and have strong relationships to Gulf individuals and radical reaches in the Gulf, but also because from the very onset, the Haqqani network was the main conduit between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. As you may remember, famously, Mullah Omar wasn't exactly sure what to do with this guy, Osama bin Laden, and it was the Haqqani network who actually convinced him to support and harbor him. And then finally, most recently, you have here the Islamic State in Iraq, in the Levant, Khorasan province, ISIL-K, that's the official name from the Security Council, which has only a small circle on my map here, but that's only because that is their main operation area, but they have cells and attack capabilities pretty much in all urban areas throughout the country. As you may have heard, I'm sure, not only did they attack Kabul airport on the 26th of August, but pretty much on a regular basis, every couple of days, there have been ISIS-K attacks in Afghanistan. The real risk of ISIS-K, and I'll come to this a little bit later on, is not just that this group is definitely trying to inspire attacks abroad, but also that this is the receiving ground for any disgruntled Taliban, the logical receiving ground for any disgruntled Taliban that are the losers, in inverted commas, from this regime, also placing a level of the moderation that whatever Taliban 2.0, and I find this a very, very dangerous term, this is Taliban 1.0 is the same individuals doing the same things, the same jobs. The first sentence of Zabiullah Mujahid in the press conference was, "We have not changed ideologically." So their communication strategy in English is better. When you read the original Pashtun Dari, then you realize it really is the Taliban of old. Therefore, even if the Taliban wanted to do a bit more moderate policies on any issue, there is a limit to what they are internally, if they want to keep the movement together, can do, because there's now a receiving opposition group, and that's unfortunately the only opposition group to speak of. Unfortunately, the National Front in the Panjshir Valley is not at the moment a viable armed opposition. This is one. And any Taliban who doesn't like what the Taliban are doing is very likely going there. And I'll explain to why there is a long tradition of the Taliban to do this. Now, let's look at the Taliban Al-Qaeda. It was a symbiotic relationship since the inception. As I said, Mullah Omar had some hesitations with this young Saudi guy, Osama bin Laden, but was quickly convinced by the Haqqani network. And as you know, very famously, they harbored Osama bin Laden even as the cost of their own regime in 2001. Now, what was the important things that Al-Qaeda did deliver to the Taliban pre-2001? And this was a physical camp infrastructure. I'll get to this in a second. Here you can see what's going on right now. This is, I'm sure you've all seen these pictures, Aminul Haq, the former security chief of Osama bin Laden, a couple of weeks ago, returning into Afghanistan, into Nangarhar, where he is originally from. As you can see, he doesn't seem to be very worried that this has become a dangerous place for him. Therefore, the train and assist that Al-Qaeda has done for the Taliban is definitely going to continue. Primarily, Al-Qaeda core, IMU, and IJGT and ETIM did this train and assist in the last couple of years, since 2015. So Azar Baas was mentioned in the previous session a couple of times. It started in 2014, but since 2015, there was a deliberate push of the Pakistani army and security forces, of the groups that they didn't like, into Afghanistan. Some fighters from LET, some fighters from Jaish-e-Mohammed, but in particular, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan were pushed over the border into Afghanistan, and the very famous fence was built in order to prevent them from coming back easily. AQIS is a purpose-built Al-Qaeda affiliate that was a real political reaction of Zawahiri to the establishment of the Islamic State in the same year, in 2014. As you know, it's a break-off of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, in order to counterbalance the propaganda war that was going on at that time against Al-Qaeda from the Islamic State. And it was this AQIS that took over the leadership of the political relationships, if you want to term that, between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda since its inception. So the close coordination that you've heard, and meetings and consultations between Taliban leaders and Al-Qaeda go all throughout the negotiations with the United States, which also tells you how much intention there is for the Taliban to actually control Al-Qaeda in their country in the future, was done by AQIS. So they were the main go-to point. Now let's have a look at the Taliban and ISIS-K. ISIS-K, or ISIL-K, as the Security Council calls it, is a purpose-built affiliate. And this is only one of two on the entire planet where the Islamic State leadership in Iraq and Syria went through the trouble to send delegations to the country. The other example is Libya, in order not to accept the pledge of allegiance from already existing already existing terror groups, but to actually, from the ground up, build a completely new ISIL presence in the country. They arrived in 2014. Then it was a group of 6 Arabs. They traveled around the country from the south to the east to the north, and then back to the east, to network, to talk to power brokers, to map out in the same way that they had mapped out parts of Syria before they established themselves there. Who is the most powerful power broker? Who is the key religious leaders in the region? And then in 2015 announced their existence. And because it was a purpose-built affiliate, until the very last minute, where the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria could finance affiliates abroad, it fully financed ISIL-K in Afghanistan. ISIL-K in Afghanistan had no income flows locally to speak of until about the middle of 2017, where ISIL in Iraq and Syria sent a message to all of its affiliates that there won't be any possibility to sending more money, because there is now a military campaign going on against us in Iraq and Syria. You're on your own, unfortunately, develop your own finances. But until this time, only Libya and Afghanistan were the two affiliates that were financed. Now, the relationship with the Taliban is an interesting one, because, as I said, the guys were in the country, networking from 2015. The establishment of ISIL Khorasan was in 2015. But until 2016, there was no visible military resistance of the Taliban against ISIL in Afghanistan. It only started when the Islamic State Khorasan was able to get control of some of the valleys in Nangarhar province and basically implemented its actual anti-drugs ideological opposition. Meaning, for about $3 million, they bought the harvest from the poppy farmers in those valleys, burnt them publicly, and declared anyone growing drugs, producing drugs, or transporting drugs through these valleys will be executed, including with their families. This was the point where the Taliban started to show actual opposition and then cooperated bizarrely with the international forces and with the Kabul government in their fight against ISIL-K. But my interpretation of this, and I was in the country at the time, was really the problem was not that there is ISIL-K and that it's in the operational area of the Haqqani network. All of this, was acceptable. There's a very shady relationship between the Haqqani network and ISIL-K in the last couple of years. It was the interference in the drug trade, this outlet into Pakistan, that the drugs needed to go for the southern and for the northern route. That was really for the southern and for the eastern route. It needed this to go away. That's why the fight started. Why was there no opposition in the first year? Because many of the ISIL-K members were Afghans, but former Taliban, disgruntled because the Taliban were becoming, in their eyes, too moderate, etc., etc. So the first reaction of the Taliban leadership to the establishment of ISIL-K, officially through social media channels, was, do not kill them, they're our brothers, they will come back. We just need to convince them of the right way. Since 2016, of course, there was then opposition to ISIL-K. There was particularly fierce fighting in the north because ISIL-K tried to establish a presence in 2018, just at the time where the Taliban were building up their presence. So it was a rivalry rather than actual enmity. And then, of course, since the handover of the Taliban, this was the big starting point, the Kabul airport attack on the 26th of August. But there have been numerous attacks in Afghanistan by ISIL-K at the moment because they need to show that they are still there, they're relevant, and they also need these attacks as propaganda material because on the global scale, and I'll get to this later again, Al-Qaeda all of a sudden is becoming popular again. It's no longer seen as the old movement that ISIL, among terrorist sympathizers, no longer seen as the old movement and ISIL as the more modern movement where young jihadis should join. Now, Al-Qaeda has won the entire country, done something together with the Taliban that ISIL could not do, and that is to establish an actual physical emirate. Now, as far as the developing threat is concerned, let me first turn to a discussion, what I think is a little bit less likely, luckily. So the re-establishment of physical camp infrastructure pre-2001 is just not really likely. This is Khaldan camp, one of the big camps, the training camps, just in 2001, and this is how the exact same area looked like a couple of hours later after the Americans took care of it. So these camp infrastructures are very unlikely to reemerge, but there's also no longer the same rationale for those camps than it was pre-2001, because what you need to understand, these thousands of fighters that were trained in the camps, the vast majority were not trained as Al-Qaeda operatives to do attacks like the USS Cole and Nairobi in Dar es Salaam, or the attack on LAX, or the attempted attack on LAX in 2000. They were trained as particular foreign fighter contingents for the Taliban fight against the Northern Alliance. Now, there is no Northern Alliance to speak of at the moment in the country. There is not the same threat level that ISIL-K poses than the Northern Alliance, which held last sways, I mean, not the majority of the country, but significant amount of territory in the north of the country, which the Taliban never were able to control. And that was the actual rationale why Mullah Omar was convinced to then harbor Osama bin Laden, was this training infrastructure. So now you don't have this internal opposition anymore. So you don't need Al-Qaeda to train thousands of fighters. And so you don't need to have those camps. But the really bad news is, as far as the terrorism threat is concerned, that really doesn't make any difference, whether you have these physical infrastructures or you don't have these physical infrastructures. If you're talking about training of attack cells for attacks outside Afghanistan, including in Europe and the United States. You can do this on the move. Since 2001, there was this mobile training camps narrative that we heard from the Pakistanis while they couldn't find the people, that these training camps move. And I believe that this is true, that you can go from house to house. You don't need to have that physical infrastructure. What is really a high risk at the moment, because there is a lot of chatter about traveling back to Afghanistan, like it was in 2001, among jihadis and terrorist sympathizers all across the globe, including in Southeast Asia, where it really is difficult to get there. And my big worry is the combination of the Haqqani network being in charge of the passport office in the Interior Ministry right now in Afghanistan, and the Haqqani network being the main conduit, and the Taliban being very unlikely to prohibit entry of individuals from abroad, from any country, that say, I just want to have a Muslim life in the only emirate that exists in the world. Of course, they're not going to deny entry. And then if the Haqqani network is in charge of the passport, you can now get, in the future, biometrically secured, perfectly original Afghan passports under any name that you choose or that your terrorist handler wants you to have. This is a big problem because it does outmaneuver our biometric control systems that we so successfully installed in around the world because of the foreign fighters that were traveling to Syria and Iraq. Now, last slide. What I think is the immediate threat is the rising danger of directed attacks. Now, we've talked about the most complex attack scenario here. People traveling to Afghanistan, getting trained, going back to wherever they want to have their attack, and conducting something spectacular like Cole, like the Bali bombing, like 9/11. This is a possible scenario, but the far more immediate scenario is directed attacks. And here you can see a picture of the attack in Berlin-Breitscheidplatz in 2015. This wasn't a directed attack, meaning the guy was already in Germany. He didn't have terrorist training when he was in Germany, but he had direct contact to the Islamic State in Iraq in the Levant, and they instructed him on what to do to conduct this attack, whose investigation only concluded a couple of weeks ago in Germany, from 2015 to 2001, because it was one of the largest terror attacks ever on German soil. This can happen all the time now. The Al-Qaeda alleged victory, together with the Taliban over the international community, is of course a massive inspiration and radicalization. The communication channels are there from Afghanistan into Europe and the US and other countries, and therefore you have this diffuse threat structure that arose through the growth of social media and communication infrastructure, where you don't really know individuals belong to ISIL, Al-Qaeda, or other groups. They're just generally terrorism sympathizers and are open for inspiration, direction, and support from anyone who wants them to conduct an attack. Now, this is definitely going to be something that we will have to watch very, very closely. ISIL-K, as I said, will grow in Afghanistan. It will welcome disgruntled Taliban. ISIL-K has already attempted several times to direct attacks in Europe, including my country in Germany. For example, at the moment, currently at Düsseldorf court, there is a group of Tajiks standing trial that were preparing multiple attacks on US military installations in Germany and were directed by ISIL-K from Afghanistan in 2019, long before the takeover of the Taliban. And the current situation will make this even more likely. Okay, this is all I wanted to say in my opening statement, and I'm very much